Hi all, I wanted to give you some context for the next piece of the class here. As we're getting ready to learn these different models, I wanted to give you some guidance on the series of activities that you're going to be completing. First of all, you're going to be creating a sample lesson plan. In this lesson plan, you're going to be taking content that may or may not already exist, and you're going to put it into the format, the model that you've just recently read about. So a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about. One is the layout, all right? So the layout is up to you completely. If you have something that you already use for your school or your district, please use that. If you don't, just make sure that you include the components, of which I'll talk about later. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I'm not going to be giving or taking away points for how good it looks. It needs to just be functional. So, the next thing I want to talk about is don't start from scratch. If you're already a teacher, please use something from your classroom already. So maybe it's something that you've been struggling around. This lesson just doesn't feel right, or boy, it would have been great if I would have known about this model beforehand. I would have used it for this lesson. Or if not, use something off the internet. There's a lot of great websites out there that give great example lesson plans. What I would recommend you not do, though, is you're kind of defeating the purpose if you look up the specific model that you're supposed to emulate with this lesson plan, because otherwise you're not getting in the practice of molding and crafting it and making it actionable based upon content. But I would recommend that you start with something. Don't try to create something from scratch. The next thing I want you to do is make sure you look at the rubric very carefully. It's exactly how I'm going to grade you. My goal is for you to be successful, and that's why I've given you that rubric in the first place. The areas that you need to make sure that you include on the lesson plan are the topic, the objectives. And when I say objectives, I mean, what is it the student should be able to know or be able to do? And sometimes it is okay if this is an information sharing type lesson. Those are perfectly normal and acceptable. But if it requires a deeper level of understanding, be sure that you know that and articulate it in those objectives. The next thing is the activities. What I'm looking for there is not only what the students are doing, what are you doing? So you don't have to go into super specific detail where I know every word you're going to say or every action the students are going to take, but in general, give me a high-level overview of the different steps and procedures that are included throughout the lesson. Next, make sure that there's some sort of assessment. And when I say assessment, I mean informal or formal. Many times, a pencil or paper test is not the correct assessment that should match up. What you're asking yourself here is, how do I know when the students have met the objectives, or if they haven't? That's what the point of assessment is. So make sure that you have some sort of assessment that aligns with it. And that brings me to the last one, is alignment. Your activities should align with your objectives. Your assessment should align with your activities and your objectives. It should all flow nicely. And if there's not alignment, kids are going to be confused, or you're not going to know whether students have met those objectives or not. That's the point of the lesson plan. I'm not going to be grading on how long it is. There's no set length. It's basically, if you can meet those criteria, that's how long it needs to be. The next activity is the model evaluation. So I've given a pretty simple form to use here, but the high-level steps of this is to give me an overview. In this overview, you'll notice that I say to keep it to just a couple of paragraphs. I just want to make sure that you understand the principles behind this model that you're talking about. Then I want the advantages and considerations. I've heard pros and cons used before. Well, if there were some pretty serious cons to a model, then why are we learning about it in the first place? But when I want you to be thinking about, what are the advantages of using this model as opposed to a different model? But what are the considerations you need to be thinking about? And those considerations may include the type of content that you're talking about, the level of the objectives or understanding that you want your students to get to, or a myriad of other things as you're starting to consider the content. So what are those things you need to be thinking about before you decide whether or not this is the right model and the most appropriate model to use? And then finally, speaking of appropriateness, just in general now that you've learned a little bit about this model, what kinds of content, what kinds of material would this likely be a good possible choice? Are these things that you use that you want students to be able to apply this knowledge? Is it simply better for information sharing and facts, or anything along those lines? And also, more importantly, I think, When is it likely not appropriate to use this model? And this could be time considerations, it could be the detail of content, it could be a lot of those type of things. So not only is it, I think in this case, it's more important to know when you shouldn't use a model. And then finally, your reflection. The reflection doesn't have to be pages and pages. In fact, I'd recommend it not. But really what I'm looking at is just an overall reflection. What did you pull from the readings, from the lesson plan when you did it, and the evaluation? Just your overall experience with this model. And you'll notice I did ask that you keep it to 3 to 5 paragraphs. I think if you just give me a few sentences, that really doesn't give me the meat of what you pulled from this. And if you go on for 3 or 4 pages, well, I'll be honest, I just don't want to read that much. I'm kidding, but the reality is it makes it a little bit tougher for me to really pull the meat out of what you're trying to say. Sometimes being succinct is good. The last thing I want to do is I want to point out to you how these two activities fit in with applicability down the road, because as I said at the beginning of the class, I want to make sure that this is something that you can apply later. Well, the first thing is, if you look ahead to the last week of class, one of the things you're going to be putting together is a desktop reference. This is like a quick reference guide, just the high points of every single model that you've looked at, so you can be looking at it later and go, oh yeah, I remember that now. Oh, this would be a good one for that model, and because it fits these criteria. So that's why the lesson plan itself, having walked through an example, having applied content to that model, and then using this evaluation, you can really pluck some of those advantages, those considerations, and things like that to drop right into this desktop reference. So this should more be a compilation of everything that you've done so far. More importantly, I think, is the applicability down the road. So when you are in the classroom, whether you're in there now or you're going to be down there, down the road, what you'll really want to be able to do is be able to have something, some way, some knowledge, some way of doing this before, because you don't want, when you're crunched for time and it's Sunday night and it's 8 o'clock and you've realized, holy cow, my lesson plans are not done for Monday. That's not the time when you want to be sitting there thinking about what's the most appropriate model to use. That's probably a movie day. In all seriousness, this is when it will be very important for you to have walked through this before, to have created this, and to have that desktop reference so that you're able to quickly and easily pull from these models without having to reference a 400-page textbook. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of context for this next phase, and I hope this video wasn't too terribly long. I did try to keep it short, which some people will tell you is really not my forte. So if you have questions, let me know. Also, please make sure you're continuing to use your peers. Your peers are going to be the best source of bouncing ideas off of, where to get things, taking a look at something before you submit it. That's exactly why they're there, because you know what? You do it for them too. Enjoy, have fun. We'll talk soon.